listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.
Simon, you have a rugby shirt behind you now, so it's the right sport. Well, it's the right shape of ball, but it's the wrong sport.
According to you, yeah. I know plenty would disagree with you. If you get anywhere near the M62, they'll probably fight you on that one.
Yeah.
And you're a married man now.
I am.
With a tan.
I am. A man with a tan. That's never normally been something that's changed, though, to be fair, mate.
Too many hours on the golf course.
Exactly. Yeah, it stops here. I'm looking forward to chatting to Matt Bullock shortly. Probably not someone that a huge number of our listeners would have heard about or know a huge amount about. But he's now been involved in brands and retail and worked his way to some pretty lofty positions within them, having started his football at Stoke City. I'm looking forward to this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he had a very short career, snapped his ACL, which I know all about. And I know it comes with a bunch of challenges. I mean, yes, okay, you snap your ACL and that's a challenge in itself. But I mean, for me, it was kind of the death of my playing career, which, albeit amateur, was a huge part of my life. So yeah, it'd be really interesting to chat about how he kind of overcame that and ultimately became really successful afterwards.
The first thing we've got to find out, though, is what the hell you call his company.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah. I've got about 8 versions down here. I'm sure you've got a bunch too.
Yeah.
So find out what it's actually called.
Let's see what he comes up with. Yeah. Matt, nice to have you with us.
Thanks, Tom.
Thank you so much for spending a bit of time with us this morning, chatting to us about your sort of transition from sport into business. Now, I've been having a bit of a conversation in and around this office space that I'm in right now. We had a conversation with Simon before we had a chat, and it's NICCE, isn't it?
Correct.
I had probably 10 different versions, none of them which were that. Talk to us a bit about NICCE, how you got to that name.
Yeah, so we're a private company, one owner, and basically it was formed in as young guys do nearly 10 years ago. 10 years ago next year, the guys are in Ibiza and having the time of their lives, no doubt. And they started saying "nice" in a kind of bit of a colloquial way, and then kind of just ended up getting stuck with NICCE. What was involved in that end outcome, it's probably for them to say. But yeah, that was how it came about. So it doesn't really mean a great deal, but in terms of that. But I think the interesting thing is it could be English, French, Italian, Spanish. It could be any of those things. So it's so probably not as exciting as you thought, but that's where it came from.
Simon, we definitely didn't come up with that.
No, absolutely. And to be fair, how many names and brands are born in a bar in Ibiza or evolve over the course of a few beers? I mean, that's often how it works, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I think it's certainly the sporting goods industry way back when, and it's probably changed more so in the past 5-6 years. But I think a lot of the evolution of the brand was, through those kind of conversations. In a bar at night or with someone in Asia or wherever it might be. And, so many great brands have developed and flourished. And, just from that backdrop, it's interesting.
Did you ever think you would end up where you are now back when you were playing? Was it something you sort of had your eye on as an end point?
No, I think like most aspiring kids, I guess, when you're on that journey, my journey was obviously shorter than most. The end point is being a professional footballer in my case. So I never actually reflected on, how my life kind of changed and got to where I've got to now and had the experiences I've had. But interestingly, actually, when you kind of reflect and listen to people who've maybe known you through your life that you didn't even realise knew you. The feedback that comes back is, my parents, well, I'm from a working class background in Leek near Stoke. My parents were very keen on me doing well at school. And, whilst we're absolutely committed to, football and that journey, there was a commitment to do as best as I possibly could at school. And I think, at the time, it's not the worst thing ever. You just want to play football, but actually you reflect and that didn't quite work out as you'd hoped. It was a great decision for my parents who probably didn't have any support or guidance. It was kind of just what they thought was best. So to answer your question, no, I didn't it's not a path I necessarily chose or thought of.
And did it mean that you were less focused, or, you talk about football was the sole priority, but did it mean you were less focused on it on a day-to-day basis? Were you always looking at that I need to have something else running alongside, or, how did that happen? Because I know, and I've spoken to Simon about this before, I think having something running alongside sport for me hopefully made me a more rounded individual and probably a better player, just because it gave me a sort of a reason to be playing. The sport changes, doesn't it, when it becomes your job?
Yeah. I think for me I was always interested in education. I was reasonably intelligent, given we get a bad press coming through as footballers. And I was interested in like maths and things like that. And I think it allowed me, probably not at the time, or maybe actually as I got to like 14, 16, it allowed me maybe to conduct myself in a better way. I had more kind of structure to what I was talking about or thinking. And it gave me probably a bit more of a framework in my kind of mindset, I guess, which not every person may be fortunate to have if they don't follow education or school, if you like. So I think it helped in that regard. But maybe actually on a negative side, it made me think about more things because I was curious to think about the outcome. Whereas, if you're, I guess, a lot of elite athletes will talk about they're in a moment and they don't necessarily think about anything other than that. I think, maybe my journey made me think about things too much because I thought about the outcome of it when maybe, on reflection, I probably shouldn't have done that.
It's really interesting actually, because a lot of athletes that I've worked with start to realise there's an enormous benefit in having something outside of their sport, and not just a hobby, but something that's really meaningful to them, so that they don't get into that trap of thinking sport equals life, life equals sport. Because if sport equals life and life equals sport, and sport goes badly, that by definition means life's going badly. And for some of them, it means that if they're losing, they start to see themselves as a failure. It has a massive impact on their identity, which sometimes they find really difficult to come out of. But also it's really interesting that you kind of talk about getting into more thinking and more analysis. I mean, actually, bizarrely, and Tom might have a view on this as well, some of the very best, most instinctive players I've ever come across haven't been particularly academically smart. And actually, it probably helps them, if you know what I mean, because they don't overthink. Because if you look at how intelligence is built, they're not academically intelligent; they're physically intelligent. Their sensory spatial awareness is incredibly well honed. But because they're not really academic, they don't dive into analysis. We hope you don't mind us interrupting this episode with a very brief shout out to our partners at the Podium Podcast, True Potential Wealth Management. At True Potential Wealth Management, their mission is to help you do more with your money. Expert financial advice, innovative investments, and leading technology are all designed to put you in control and help you achieve your financial goals. To find out more about their specialist advice, investment opportunities, and pension services, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. That's domorewithyourmoney.co.uk. With investing, your capital is at risk. True Potential Wealth Management LLP is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Thanks for listening. Now, let's get you back to this week's show.
Aside from that focus, Simon, and the intelligence, should elite athletes have anything outside of a real sort of inherent desire to get to the top? Is it, if you want to get to the top, should everything else be shut away, or do you think that is it one size fit all, or is it case by case?
I think a little bit case by case. Yeah, I mean, you can see some athletes who, because of their sort of psychological makeup and their personality, are much happier being really single-minded and focused. But it does create a potential trapdoor, which is that you become obsessive about the sport to the exclusion of everything else. And then, like I say, you get yourself into that really potentially vulnerable position where you are an athlete and nothing else. You don't see yourself as anything else. And therefore, the opportunity and the likelihood of feeling pressure is far, far greater because, everything rests on this. Your entire identity rests on it. Your success and failure rest on this. Your self-worth rests on this. And that, I think, can be potentially a really fragile place for people.
Matt, did you find that identity was an issue for you when you finished up playing, or was it not something that bothered you?
I mean, obviously, I was young and, football had been pretty much my life for, I actually got picked up late, like at 11, and then by kind of 20, 21, I would kind of finish, really.
I like how 11 is late.
Yeah, it's crazy now. I mean, my daughter's really good, actually. She plays for Liverpool at under 14s, but the kids there are like under 6.
Wow.
It's just it wasn't. I mean, I'm only going back 25, 30 years actually since my journey started. But the evolution of the facilities and opportunities changed so much in that time versus what we had. But I guess from my point of view, whilst I had education on the side, I was singularly minded to get to the point of being a footballer. And when it finished, I really didn't know what to do because I didn't have any, and I still think fundamentally it's a challenge within the game in that, when kids finish, there's not enough support to help people who've had a bad injury, who've lived through that dream, and even 25 years ago, just from a financial perspective, you're still getting paid pretty well, relative to what your value in the real world is, which is actually nothing, really at that point in time. So there was no opportunity to go into anything but have support to say, and this is a path that you could take. So when I finished, I found that first 6 months like really, really, really challenging. And I think on reflection, I think because maybe my brain was structured in a way that, I had been through a bit of an academic process. I think I could compartmental myself to get out of that space I were in to then look forward. But I don't, and that was with no support whatsoever. But I don't think that is true of a lot of people who are in that position, which is 99% of people who come through my journey. So it's.
And when you come out of sport, you can see, honestly, there's so many different paths you can take, depending on what conversations you're having, who you know, I guess what level you've played at and for how long. How did you end up facing in the direction that you're facing? And set off in one direction as opposed to another?
I think.
Why aren't you a mathematician, basically? Given your love of maths.
I think, in life, in sport, in everything, luck's kind of a big part of it as well. Never underestimate the part luck plays in your life, I guess. If you dealt a bad hand, typically if you work hard, I do believe you will get a good hand. And I think from my perspective, I'd come out of football, I'd kind of had a really difficult 6 months, of personally just reflecting on what's next. And, then I kind of thought, you know what, I'm going to do some courses. So I went to did some open university things. I've always been interested in like law or accountancy. So I thought, they're professional things. But then actually going down that path was going to take a long time because I'd been to university and I've been paid quite well for 5 years and I liked being paid okay, and didn't have that. So I just thought, I'll just go get a job. And I just went to applied for a few jobs. I think I worked in an insurance company for a little bit, and then luckily got a job, and purely by luck. And football, obviously helped because it was with a sports brand. So then I went to work for NICCE, which was part of Pentland Group. And, it was a football company, so my synergies were good. So that was the bit of luck, I guess, I had at that point in time,
It's funny how you can end up facing one way as opposed to another, Simon.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I think your challenge, Matt, was different than many people who are transitioning out of sport. If you think about academy systems as they are now, I mean, many people who are involved in sport know that your chances of making the first team are less than 1% if you come up for an academy. So many kids transition out when they're in their teens, which is not a bad time, honestly, because you can go and get yourself some education and think about the career and all that sort of stuff. Equally, if you come to a natural point of retirement, you could start thinking about it in your mid to late 20s and put something in place so that you can transition out in your maybe mid 30s and have something to walk into. But of course you didn't. And I can imagine it was quite an abrupt sort of end to your career, unplanned, completely unplanned, and therefore create a far different challenge for you than many people would experience.
Yeah, and I kind of think if what happened to me would have happened when I was 29, I'd have been in a lot worse situation because the reality was I couldn't retire. I wouldn't have had enough money to retire at that point, given the trajectory and the money in the game at that point in time. But I actually would have been in the same position at 29 that I were when I was 20, because in the real world I didn't have any worth. I just had a bit more football experience, so I could have done coaching or whatever, but that wasn't necessarily something that excited me. But obviously, having been in football through my work career as well, as that kind of evolved, I know a lot of very successful football players now who've played in the Premier League for a long period of time, with the rewards that brings, and who are, similar ages to me, who've finished their careers and they're kind of got 50 years and they're not sure what to do, and so there's a different trapping. So whilst they've enjoyed all the success, they're kind of, whereas they've done fantastically well to earn the money they've earned, they're kind of lost now in the journey of what do I do next? I don't want to go and coach. Whereas I kind of flipped it around really and took the pain early. And my career now is, as I get into my 40s for the next 10 to 15 years, is probably at the high point it will be. So yeah.
Talk to us a bit about how you moved on through MITA and the other companies you've been to, because I know you've had a lot of experience in the past few years within this sort of space, and how you ended up where you are now. Yeah,
so I went into MITA. I think I run like 10 grand a year or something. Coming from football, it's like, oh wow, this is like totally different. And just started basically like blowing up footballs and deflating footballs and things like that. Real like dog's body job. But I still living at home, so I suppose there was a few pros to that. And then really kind of just worked hard, built relationships with people. I think football had allowed me to be able to deal with people of different ages. Being able to kind of handle a relative level of media, if you like, and conduct yourself in a way where you can sit in meetings and come across, informative and like legible, I guess, and with a point of view. Worked hard. They believed in me, sent me to work in different locations around the world, and went to India when I was like 22, literally only been working for like a year. And, that kind of changed my life a little bit as well. Just seeing what it's like outside of the bubble we kind of exist in, and which was very interesting at such a young age. I think, again, as I reflect, that's probably quite a big moment in shaping, the mindset of the future. And stayed there for a few years, and then got, I did a lot of work with the FA and with the England football team at that time, and then got approached to go and work for Umbro, who had the master rights for the FA. Went to work for them for a period of time and started learning about how to make footwear, apparel, equipment, and how commercially you take that through a process. Umbro got bought by Nike. And then, a lot of my time was then spent in Portland as I came into my mid-20s. So my journey was pretty quick in terms of understanding, and I think my appetite to learn and listen and to be part of things helped. So I was involved in sports for finished football and stayed involved in sports probably for the next 7 or 8 years, and then kind of jumped into retail where I got a leadership opportunity, which again, I've always been, I think all through my life, I always kind of made the decision in the dark times that I'm just going to try and be the best I can. And whatever the best is, if it's right at the top or you don't quite get there, that's what I'll try and do. And just try and do different things that are out of my comfort zone a bit. And I think sport gives you that. It gives you maybe a bit more confidence to try things that are a little bit out of your comfort zone and give it a go the best you possibly can. So I went to work for retail. I'm really fortunate to be on the leadership team of that company, and then we went through a round of investment. And so I spent a period of time at Go Outdoors, which is really, really interesting, very different dynamic of working private company, and then got an investment equity into the company. And then I continued my journey into retail at that point in time when I went to work for JJB, which unfortunately failed, but went bankrupt. But again, it was an interesting period where I learned quite a lot as well, and how people react to going through that situation of a failing company, having worked there for 25 years. And then just develop more, in leadership roles for the next 10 years to kind of, running companies, looking at investment rounds, sitting on, some reasonably large, 10 to 100 million pound company boards. And, you've built a rounded, I'm not an expert in anything, but I think I've probably got quite a good general knowledge of most things and can communicate in a reasonably effective way in that arena. So I kind of find myself now, really, as I kind of entered my 40s, feeling a lot older than 40. Kind of in a position now where I kind of look at different companies and support, whether or not they're private or whether or not they're equity backed, and support the next stage of their journey, really, using the layers of information I've built over the last 20 years, but more so probably the last 10 years, I'd say.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, we've asked this question to quite a few people. What do you take from your sporting life into your post-sporting life? And competitive drive and all those sorts of things tend to be the obvious things people think about, highly motivated and competitive. But there are some characteristics in there: the ability to step outside your comfort zone, the ability to try things, fail, try them again. I think, lots of people describe that as a growth mindset. I think that's incredibly important. And one thing that sports players do is they have to go through a process of learning in order to develop skills. And the ability to develop skills, I think, is also critical, because you may have developed a set of skills when you were playing football that in themselves aren't applicable beyond football, unless you happen to be knocking a ball around an office or a warehouse somewhere. But actually the ability to pick up and learn new skills and take yourself outside of your comfort zone and put yourself in new situations and keep learning from it all, that I think is absolutely invaluable.
Especially in a market like retail, I'm just thinking there, because it's always changing, right? There's always something. So you've actually, even if you're learning about something that's enabling you to have another skill to apply to your role, the actual market is changing behind you. So your application of it back out of your role has to change as well. So I guess you have to think on your feet quite quickly, do you not, in that space?
Yeah, and I think that, I think like when like some of the brands I've worked for, like New Balance, Nike, etc., everything's kind of in the future with a lot of those brands. So they're more kind of, it's hard to fail fast and learn, because the outcome of what you're doing might take 18 months to happen, because, that's the timeline it takes for product or commercial things to come to life. But you're right, in retail, and I think that's why in my life I've kind of flipped between both, because there's a structure and excitement about that longer term journey. But actually, in something like retail, everything's real. Every day is different. The number's different every day. But you can learn really quick from what's worked, what's failed, and you can adjust like really quick in retail. It's a brutal existence for sure. It's not easy. It takes a very certain type of person to be successful in certainly a leadership environment in retailers. But I think the balance between both kind of gives you a bit of perspective as well. But to your point, I think learning, failing fast, not being afraid to fail. We'll always communicate that with the team. Try things. There's lots of things that won't work, and I guess as you climb the tree, it's been quoted for Fergie lots of times. The better you get, you've got to make the right decision 9 out of 10 times. And that's But when you're climbing, you can fail 8 out of 10 times. It's fine, because someone will catch you and support you and help you. And I think that's probably quite a big learning from the companies I've worked for, and the different speeds of change within them as well.
Simon, I think some of the other guests that we've had on, I don't think they've all moved in various different directions, doing all sorts of different things. But there's quite a lot of it's quite steady, the way that the market in there it exists in, and I don't know. I'm not sure whether I certainly couldn't be able to. I wouldn't be able to cope. I wouldn't be able to keep up with what's cool with the kids. It just moves so quickly. I think that what I'm thinking, as I'm listening to Matt, is everything moves so fast that you have to be able to use what you've learned from sport in a far different way to perhaps some of our other guests have had to. But not, in no disrespect to them, they've just got different avenues they've gone after. What are your thoughts on that, Simon?
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about kind of being able to take risks and being comfortable taking risks. And one of those things that I think you perpetually do when you're working in a future-orientated business, as Matt's described, you're trying to look at where the world's going to be in 2-3 years' time, because what you do today will be the thing that you release in 18 months. So you've always got to be thinking right on the front edge of that curve. And of course, there's a chance you might get it wrong, or the thing that you produce might not be flavour of the moment when it hits the shelves. So I think you've got to be more comfortable operating in uncertainty. You've got to be more comfortable operating with the prospect of failure. And actually, as you and I have reflected in the past and chatted to a couple of guests, when you're in the world of elite sport, you actually fail publicly a lot of the time. And I think for a lot of athletes, it makes them not immune necessarily, but kind of insulated against failure, against, what people say. I mean, if you're in a stadium full of thousands of people and you make a mistake, you get booed, right? And to a certain extent, if that cripples you, you're not going to be there for very long. So you have to become a bit more insulated against that stuff. And I do think it gives elite athletes a different view on failure and risk. And maybe they are able to be just a little bit bolder about what they do.
You've been booed much, Matt, since you moved into a new role?
It's not in your face like a stadium. It's behind your back more.
I get booed every time I walk in the house.
I kind of think, when you talk about like world class and looking into the future and things like that in a corporate sense. I'm fortunate enough to be part of Nike family, which is probably, the market leading brand within certainly sports sector or sportswear sector. And, the one thing that, there's a lot of ex-athletes that have become very successful executives at Nike as well. And I think one thing that kind of struck me, during late 20s at that point in my life was, their belief was, we will, whatever we create, be it a trend or in the future, it will be the best. And we will ensure that through our communication, through our athletes, through how we reach our consumer and the public, we're going to tell everyone it's the best and it will be the best. And I think it's quite a US corporate mentality, but they are the best and they've achieved their goal. But the way they went about it through the whole process of the business is actually incredibly impressive and a big learning for anyone who's been exposed to it. And you can relate that to being in a successful team at whatever part of your career, that everyone had the commitment to be the best and become the best and deliver the best. So that was very awe-inspiring as well in a corporate sense.
Yeah.
How did you go about thinking in the future? How did you go about knowing I've got no idea how you do that.
It's a great question, but actually, if you look at like big brands like Nike or New Balance, they're informing the future because they're creating footwear or product that's actually based on research and changing the dynamic of that game or that mindset. And then they're telling you why it's doing that, and they're convincing you through their marketing, through their ambassadors, that what they're doing is right. So they are in effect creating the trend of the future. High fashion is obviously very, very, very different. But when you work for like an SME business or a smaller business, it's incredibly difficult to look into the future because you haven't got the money to tell everyone what you're doing this is the future. So invariably you kind of become a bit more kind of looking at trends, fast following, trying to look as far as you can, but knowing the constraints of the budget and the marketing that you've got. So I think to answer your question, the big guys can do it because they're informing the future. Smaller guys, we have to probably we've got to have a USP and a point of view, but typically you're more of a faster follower to what you've seen around you through research.
One of my observations on this one,
I can't even get my head around it.
Yeah, one of my observations is that, and having sort of worked people who are more in the tech space than the fashion space in this, they're always used to. It's almost like their timeline is different than everybody else's. So they're always looking in the future. They're looking 2 years ahead now, but next year they'll be still looking 2 years ahead, but in a year's time. So it's just like they're working on a timeline that's just shifted forwards by a couple of years. I also find it incredible because most people's answer to these sorts of things would be, well, you ask your customers. But I reflect on Henry Ford's view on this. If we asked our customers what they wanted, they just said a faster horse because they didn't realize what they actually wanted was a car. So these people are genuinely visionaries. But they're sort of working on, well, this is what we kind of planned last time. This is what we can do to evolve it. This is what we can do to evolve it again. And they're just working a couple of years ahead of it where everybody else's headspace is, but they're still evolving stuff, if you know what I mean. They're still working on the basis that they're taking what we've got so far and asking, how can we make it better?
I think in terms of my personal journey, it becomes, as you start like running companies, you're dealing with now and tomorrow, which is, you're thinking, can we pay everyone this week? But you're also trying to think about 18 months, a year down the line as well. And, how do you surround yourself with people who are better than you in those areas of innovation for sure. But it's been, how do you kind of compartmentalize your mind to deal with the bank in the morning and then deal with technology in the afternoon. And it's quite an interesting kind of juxtaposition of how you have to work in smaller companies or senior leadership roles versus being very specialised in an area.
I think having and working in the fintech space, listening to my CEO talk about, the advancement of technology, my head spins as to how he even came up with this platform that we've been building. But I wonder that's because I've been entrenched in sport, where actually you don't think more than 5 days ahead. For 20 years, I was never more than 5 days ahead of, what's coming down the road next Saturday or next Sunday. Who's going to be trying to knock me over next week? And maybe that's about as far in the future as I got. And it's because you're so in the moment. You can't go that far ahead, because if you mess up now, you don't get that far anyway.
But I guess there was no need for you to think any further than that.
No, but then actually now listening to you, my mind's like, wow, I don't know, I can't get my head around it. It's quite weird. Well, it doesn't surprise Simon at all. My smoke coming out of my ears. It's not very rarely that I'm on top of something.
No, you're absolutely right, though. And focusing on the moment is critical. But for some people in their roles, they just need to be able to look ahead and envision, how might the future look and how do we get there? I think, really senior positions, executive positions, they're always looking ahead. Where do we want to be in 2 years' time, 3 years' time, and how do we get there? I mean, the furthest I can remember when I was working in elite sport looking forward was being challenged in 2006 ahead of London 2012 games. How do we make sure we get as many athletes on the podium as possible in 6 years' time? And that's not thinking to the end of this Olympic cycle, it's thinking to the end of the next one. Who are those people going to be that are standing on the podium? How do we identify and spot them today? What do we do to make sure we've got the best chance of putting as many as possible on podiums in 6 years' time? And at the time, that was quite a challenge for me, because it meant stretching my thinking. And the more you do it, of course, the more you're into the unknown, the more you're into vagueness and uncertainty, and you're essentially sort of plotting the path as opposed to following a path. It's a different way of thinking. I think, like many things, these are muscles that you flex over time, and the more you get used to flexing them, the more natural it becomes.
I think also you're asking for finance or something that you're not going to see realised for a long period of time. So you're asking for support or someone to say, hey, here's X, go and deliver in 10 years. Now, that's a big ask, right? With that comes a lot of pressure and a lot of planning to get to that point as well. And out of those 100 people, only half of them might get to that point in time. So there's the pressure of having to, it's like going to the bank or investment and saying, can I have 100 million and I'm going to deliver X in 5 years? You've got to deliver something for it, right? And I think that's the pressure of looking ahead quite a lot of the time as well.
Yeah, definitely. So Matt, look, listen, we always end up completing our podcast with the same 4 questions. I'll chuck them your way. These are properly going to test you. Okay, so you get all your future thinking. Like, you're not going to have heard anything like this. If you hadn't been a professional athlete, what would you have been? Is there another vocation that took your interest?
Yeah, it's a lot stereotypical, but I'd love to have been a lawyer. I love the firm. I love the theatre of being in court. I like that. And
similar money to football as well, probably.
Like everything, depends how good you are. But yeah, and I just love that theatre and that aspect of being on show. Even though I'm probably quite an introvert type person, I think that's kind of what I would have wanted to be given the time.
Good stuff. If you who is it you admire most in sport and in business?
Yeah, in sport, I think I really like Jose Mourinho from a football background. So I think it's, there's a lot of bravado and press around him as an individual, where he's come from, what he's delivered. He wasn't the best footballer in the world. He learned as a translator. He studied the game. He understood players, how to get the best out of players. And he's a winner. And I think, he's a great, and love him or hate him, I think really admire the journey he's been on, because it's not a typical journey to get to the top.
No. I don't think there'll be many saying Jose Mourinho. But I quite like that.
I like the thinking behind it.
I think it's a good one. Yeah, definitely.
I think from the business side, one of my probably favourite brands is Disney. And I just think, I think from a business side, I really like, and I know people released a book a few years ago, but Bob Iger and what he did when he came into Disney. I think from like a brand perspective, whilst a very successful company, a huge company, I think taking it back to its roots of, it's an animation company and making it even more successful than it was from a business side in corporate America, which is hard. I think he did a fantastic job, and everything that brand stands for is world class. And I think he did a fantastic job in his tenure there.
Someone's going to give you some funds to invest. What are you going to invest it in?
I buy a football club.
Which one?
Well, depends how much money I got, I guess. but I think there's so much. I think from my learnings, people I've met, people I know want to get involved back in the sport. I think there's so much you can do with community fans in running clubs in a more ethical way. Yes, they are commercial, but I think there's different ways to run a club and different goals you can achieve. And someone give me some money, I'd do that.
Brilliant.
If you could only watch one film for the rest of your life, what would it be?
I think this is definitely a cliche one, but it would be Shawshank. It's from my generation. It's a long film, but I think the story is it's hope, right? It's hope, and he beats the system and he gets through that system, and I think it's a good learning. I've probably watched it 100 times, like lots of people of my age and generation, and also sports people have nothing to do in the afternoon. That's all. But yeah, I'd say that.
I like it. There's 2 or 3 that have said Shawshank Redemption, so you're not on your own there.
I think it's going to be our top most highly voted film, that one.
Yeah, well, I don't think anyone's going to come up with John Wilkins' Groundhog Day. No one's going to come out of that again, which I thought was quite clever. Yeah. Which is what I didn't expect from a rugby league player.
Whoa!
Yeah, shots fired. I like it, Matt. It's been so good to chat to you for the past half an hour, 40 minutes. It's been really, really interesting listening to you. Done a fantastic job of transitioning your way to the top of some really interesting brands, and we appreciate your time with us.
Yeah, thank you very much,
guys.
Listening to Podium Podcast with Simon Hartley and Tom May. This is the show that invites the world's top athletes to discuss life in and after professional sport. Podium Podcast is brought to you by True Potential Wealth Management. To find out more, visit domorewithyourmoney.co.uk.